Afternoon, everybody. This is Matt Webster again, back with the Christian Journey series. Um, Today's topic that I wanted to go over is fear. And why this topic is important is that people often disassociate fear and what the importance of it is within the Christian journey, and the understanding that fear is not necessarily something that is evil. And I think understanding fear itself helps people better understand where they need to be going and how God may be directing them. So, in my life, there's been a lot of things I've been afraid of. Even so much so that there are things that I'm probably still afraid of that I'm unaware of. But to give some examples, to kind of go down the list here, one of the biggest things I was afraid of was even doing stuff like this content. Um, I didn't feel like I was really well prepared for it, and that it wasn't something that I necessarily wanted to do in the beginning. Partially because I didn't feel adequate enough for it. I didn't feel well equipped for it. And I've always been afraid to speak up when I thought I had something important to say. And I think through that fear, God was trying to show me that I may actually, in fact, be saying some of the most important stuff without even realizing it. Now, I do spend a lot of time joking with friends and laughing and trying to lighten the mood of things, which I think is an important part of understanding how you kind of counter fear. And laughter and joy are a big counter to fear. But there's a lot of other things that are counters to fear as well, and understanding that is a good way to start. Now, as far as my own fears, there are a lot of people in my life that are really important, and there's actually 7 people that kind of inspired this thought process today for this video. And different things I learned from each of them, and things that God was showing me in my own life that kind of led to how God was speaking to me and what purpose I was going to have through God and what He was really wanting me to do. And that's another thing that's important to understand about fear when you're working with God. Oftentimes your fears lead to your purpose. So me talking up and trying to be the one that steps forward first when I know all my friends aren't there yet kind of leads to the purpose of leading, by example, being that person that walks ahead, that makes the path. Kind of like Jesus makes the path for us and we follow Him. There are people that will lead those people through Jesus. I hope that makes sense. The other things that I've been afraid of, truthfully, I felt like I was never going to be adequate enough for people around me, and I always wanted to be accepted. And sometimes, instead of saying what I truly felt was right or wrong, I would go with what the norm was, and it never really felt right. And the other thing is I would try to get validation through those people, and it kind of led to a lot of staleness in myself, where it was kind of I never really felt fulfilled. A lot of it just didn't feel right. Now, having said that, some of the people in my life that have popped up kind of led me to this point in life where it was a lot of my fears being unfounded. God will sometimes put people in your path that are directing you back towards the path without even realizing it. One of the big things was God sometimes will use other people to speak to you directly, and they may not even be aware of it. One of the people who had come into my life more recently in these last couple of years had said something that I'd always felt deep down inside was like truth, but I kind of steered clear of it because part of me was scared, didn't feel like I was adequate enough for that, didn't feel like I was really qualified for that. And part of it was needing to humble myself enough to understand that I did have a certain level of arrogance about myself when things would be put in my corner. And having said that, it has to do with leadership. Um, One of the things you learn is that if you're appointed to something, you first have to have an understanding of it, and sometimes you have to go through trial and error to kind of figure this stuff out. To kind of go over a little bit more, one of the people in my life had said something that at the time I didn't realize what was happening, and it was kind of leading me to that path. Um, I never really realized that I just needed someone else to say it and confirm it, but the word this person used to describe me was a king. And then, like, they said I was lion like. And for me, that was a big deal, and people don't even realize how big of a deal some words like that can be. Now, the other thing with that was is that that person was seeing the presence of Jesus in my life in me. And at first, I really didn't feel like that really applied to me, and it was just nice hearing it, but not realizing that it was going to lead me to the path of like leadership and like wanting to be an effective leader. Um, Especially when I had tried many times before and failed. Which leads me to a little bit of a story here. I had a friend when I was working at Walmart. His name is Joey Hernandez. Um, Really great guy, one of my closest friends. Unfortunately, passed away. He was murdered here in Reno. It led me to a lot of regrets with things that had happened between me and him. We used to hang out all the time, do things together. We were going to start a country rap band, funny enough, together. So it was kind of an interesting little joke between the two of us. One day, I'd had people getting in my head about at some point becoming a leader and doing this and that, and it kind of like got in my head, and like, if I'm being honest, at the time I really wasn't ready for leadership, and it kind of became evident because I didn't know how to humble myself at the time and be respectful about things and say things in a way that was truthful without coming off as prideful. So, my friend and I, Joey, had gotten into some arguments, and he'd realized something that I didn't realize at the time, which was that yes, I had good leadership qualities and capabilities, but I also wasn't doing it for the right reasons. I was doing it for reasons of pride, and like I had a little man complex to some degree, where it was like I became arrogant and selfish, and like the other thing was is I was doing it for the system. I wasn't doing it for the people, and he recognized that because the place we had worked together didn't treat people well. In fact, that company still doesn't really treat people well. And the way they go about leadership is ball and chain and whip, and like they don't take into consideration people's unique abilities, and that everyone operates at a different speed and pace, and that really it was only about numbers and statistics. It was never about whether or not you were truly performing at your best. They only cared about numbers, and the numbers were always increasing to a point where it was just unreachable, unrealistic. And I would try to meet those quotas and numbers to the point of the fact where I was exhausting myself. I was very upset and grumpy all the time instead of just trying to stay within my own growth radius I was trying to push out way beyond the natural of what was intended. Um, to kind of wrap this story up, though, he recognized that, and we got into some arguments, and we eventually didn't talk for a while. Almost got into a fight where we worked, and a couple of weeks had gone by, and like basically he'd come up and apologized and was trying to humble himself, but I was so prideful and arrogant that I just didn't care, didn't want to apologize. And part of that was a fear that I didn't want to admit that I was wrong. And what had happened was, it wasn't long after that that he was shot in the park, and he was in the hospital dying. And like, I had a friend message me, and I had such a hard time believing it that when I finally did show up to work, and I couldn't acknowledge that he was going to die. And a lot of people were very upset with me because I never apologized to him, and it was a big regret on my life. And part of that has led me to fears with other people where I don't want to let people go, and I don't want to leave things unsaid. And it's a fear that I worry about with other friends too, where I don't want them stuck on that path doing the same thing. And when I see it in people, I realize that I've made similar mistakes to some of my friends, and I see some of the things that they're doing, and I want to help them. And the thing is like, this is another fear. Sometimes you want to help people, and it's for a good reason, but sometimes the best thing you can do is share your stories with them of your own experiences and let it be, because how that person receives the story or whether or not they're actually taking what you're saying seriously is up to them. I wanted to kind of go over some Bible scriptures too that point out characters who had fear even within the Bible, and kind of like demonstrate kind of where my thought process was with these. So there's a character called Gideon in the Bible, in the book of Judges. I'll just read a short paragraph about what was said. So Judges 6:15. Pardon me, my lord, Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Mansai, and I am the least in my family. So, much like my own experience, Gideon had a lot of self-doubt and self-worth, and he overcame that by becoming, he wasn't fearless, which is I'm going to demonstrate with a really good quote here. Bravery is not the absence of fear, it's the ability to move forward even when you're in fear. Now, whether or not that quote's exactly the way it said is irrelevant, but the point is that coming to God doesn't mean that you're going to be fearless or you're going to have an absence of fear. Sometimes it's just a matter of stepping out in faith that even though you are afraid of something, that something else is going to happen good in your life. Something else I wanted to point out is that one of my biggest fears is that I really want to help those around me and be in service to the people around me. And sometimes that makes me a little overzealous, and I want to get things done fast, and I want to see results sometimes, and it's not the healthiest thing to do because things always take time. And having to learn how to slow down has been a big process of my own, and again, it comes to this thing that I want to help the people around me more than anything. And I think the problem with the way the world views leadership, especially now, is that you have to do everything with an iron fist and there's no amount of grace involved in it. And by grace, I mean like we don't give the people the capacity to fail on their own. And sometimes you have to just be supporting and be there because people are going to make mistakes. And in my own experience, what I'm learning through this is that let people make the mistakes, especially if you've already made them yourselves. Because sometimes what will happen is that certain people you'll help them stopping make the mistake to begin with by giving them your story. Other people will make the mistake, and then because you've also made that mistake and you've walked out the process, you'll be well equipped to help them through the process of coming to terms with how to better themselves after the mistake has been made. Because that's a big thing that people do, is that they don't forgive themselves, which is a big thing. I don't think a lot of people understand too that you have to forgive yourself before you can forgive others, really. Because if you can't forgive yourself, how can you really forgive other people? We're all human, we make mistakes, and I think making mistakes is a natural part of the process. In fact, I think most of the more really true Christians have made a ton of mistakes. And it's okay to make mistakes as long as you're learning from them. Now, one of the other things is that I'm not good at letting go of things, and I really am not good at letting go of people. And I've acknowledged that. And part of the thing that God was teaching me is that you have to let go of people sometimes that you really love, not because God doesn't want them to be around you or in their life, but because there's a process that they need to understand of how to break the cycle themselves. And sometimes you can be the best example in someone's life of how to break a cycle, and that person just not see it until after they've been back in the cycle that they were trying to break. A lot of my friends, I've noticed, like to repeat the same cycles, and even if I tell them I can see it or I can point out things to them about that, sometimes it's better to just let people walk it out so they can see for themselves. I've had my own cycles that needed breaking. I often, like I said, didn't want to let people go. Um, there are people that I let go, and then immediately upon letting them go, they came back because they were starting to see things that they were missing. Now, something I wanted to point out is because I am so steadfast, and it was something that was pointed out in my own life by the church that I go to and the people, the men of my church, which, by the way, is a great church. If you ever want to, Living Waters Church Fellowship off of Moana is a very, very good church. Um, Best church that I've ever been to. And I'm learning a lot from the men in this men's group and the people that I've surrounded myself with. One of the things that was pointed out is that I'm very zealous and very steadfast. And this Bible verse has been told to me many times, and it didn't really start clicking until more recently, but I want to share this with you, and it's Proverbs 19:2. Desire without knowledge is not good. How much more will hasty feet miss the way? So, what this verse is really saying is that if you're jumping into something without any knowledge of how to approach it, or with any kind of discernment, a lot of times you can go into something thinking you have this great idea, but then miss the mark completely. And I often do that with the people I love the most, where I accidentally push people away because I want to help them, but I'm not equipped at the moment to help that person the way that I would like to help. Anyways, I kind of hope this highlights my point about fear, because fear is not necessarily a bad thing, and it can be a tool used for good if you really understand what fear is, and understanding how your unique fears need to be addressed. Um, Mine really was just putting aside my pride and like jumping into things without questioning whether or not I could do it or not. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but I'm also learning as I go. Anyways, I hope this video found you guys well. See you next time.